information I had that they were indeed recognized as Mossad agents who were essentially tracking a Muslim activist in the New York, New Jersey area, which was known to be active since the mid-90s, and so that we eventually were able to piece the story together and go with it.
And what eventually happened to the 5 men?
They were sent home to Israel in, I think, November, if I remember, allegedly for immigration violations. And they're home.
We don't have much time, and I wanted to get to another story, which was the story of the so-called art students, Christopher Ketchum. Very briefly outline this parallel story.
Well, basically, the phenomenon of the art students, for want of a better phrase, because it is truly a mystery. Even to me, I'm a complete agnostic about this part of the story. These so-called art students were young Israeli men and women who were traveling the country. They were identified by the Drug Enforcement Agency as repeatedly attempting to penetrate government offices, including DEA offices, and to try to sell art, these cheap knockoff oil paintings, to government officials. Now, after September 11th, when in the wake of these sudden attacks, investigators began to go back and look at the nexus of art student activity with the nexuses of the activities of the future hijackers, or the 9/11 hijackers. And what they found was that the art students, in many cases, were living in very close proximity to the September 11th hijackers. Many of these art students were moving large amounts of cash. Some of them were reportedly, according to Le Monde, carrying cell phones provided them by the vice consul, an Israeli vice consul in the U.S. Many of them were trained, highly trained in electronic intercept and intelligence work that was far beyond the compulsory military training required by Israeli law. So these are part of the suspicions were aroused, and they remain. So.
Suspicions that they were tracking the hijackers.
That's correct.
Let's go to Alexander Coburn. You have published this piece. It is titled Cheering Movers and Art Student Spies. What did Israel know in advance of the 9/11 attacks? Who were the Israelis living next to Mohammed Atta? What was in the van on the New Jersey shore? How did 2 hijackers land on watch list weeks before 9/11? Who shut down Fox News' Carl Cameron? We just have 2 minutes, but talk about the way the media has covered this, why you chose to cover it, and that last story of Fox.
The main thing, Amy, is that basically this story, which Perlman and others did do good work on, has been systematically suppressed by the media for a very long time, starting with Fox News, which killed off Cameron, the ABC News, which dropped it, and obviously, there were thousands of questions which Ketchum goes into in great detail, which should be the subject of congressional hearings and investigations, such as was the Mossad essentially being subcontracted by the CIA to work in the United States on spying, which would be illegal? How much did the Israelis really know? If it was a good thing for Israel, maybe they withheld the final news that the thing was going to land. That's a speculation, of course, but it should be investigated and probed. It's absolutely extraordinary that Ketchum's story, which has been worked on, which is a very long and complex story, could not find any outlet until a Counterpunch, which is what we're here for, could publish it. It's obviously the main reason is the word Israel. People drop it like a hot potato. As soon as you hear people saying it's a good thing for Israel, you get the whole lobby came in and had those people whipped out of the jail and sent back to Israel. And since then, all questions regarding it had been systematically choked off. I think that's the sort of journalistic powder cake. So
Alexander, this story that you've published, first was going to go to Salon.com, then The Nation?
That's what I understand from Christopher. Yes, that's true.
Christopher Ketchum?
Yeah. The editors didn't feel that there was any news here.
And I'd like to ask Mark Perlman, were you surprised when the 9/11 Commission report came out that there was no mention of at all in the reports of possible knowledge by Israeli agents in this country of the attacks or tracking of some of these suspects?
Yes and no. I mean, I was surprised because since there have been questions that are still being asked now, that at least the Commission would address the issue, even to debunk it. That being said, my reporting was narrow, was about those movers and what they were doing, and the conclusion was that they were essentially spying on radical activists in the region, and that they had been let go because the American authorities had determined that they did not have foreknowledge of the attacks, which is different than what the article says, because it implies that they were essentially shipped to Israel because of the Israel lobby and because they knew. Whereas what I have been able to find out is that they were sent home because they did something they were not supposed to do, and without the knowledge of the American government, which is an issue, obviously, that should be discussed publicly.
That the Israelis were spying on U.S. soil.
Right, without the approval of the U.S. authorities. Sometimes friendly governments have agreements where they can kind of like spy together. Apparently, this was a case where it was not happening.
Mark, we're going to have to leave it there. Mark Perlman of the Forward, which is based in New York. Christopher Ketchum, freelance journalist, author of this latest piece that appears in Counterpunch. Alexander Coburn, thanks also for joining us, editor of Counterpunch newsletter. And that does it for our show. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Shufa Dokuduce, John Hamilton, Elizabeth Press, Aaron Mate, Lee Bjork, Jen Utz, Anna Nagara, Anurata Bhagwati. I'm Amy Goodman, Climate Salas. Thanks for joining us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report, and we're going to continue this discussion for just another minute, especially for Free Speech TV viewers. Our guest, Mark Perlman of the Forward newspaper, Alexander Coburn of Counterpunch, and Christopher Ketchum, freelance journalist, who did this piece called What Did Israel Know in Advance of the 9/11 Attacks. I want to go back to Alexander Coburn on this issue of Carl Cameron of Fox News. Explain what happened. What does Fox have to do with this story?
Well, Carl Cameron done a pretty good investigation, as is outlined by Chris Ketchum in the story, and going into the Israeli, the art student aspect particularly, and his investigation became the subject of tremendous pressure, and really Chris should